Hey, everyone.
Gentlemen.
Good morning.
Morning.
It's Wednesday, 15th. Yeah, it's another week, and as Brian says, another day in paradise.
That's right. Living the dream.
That's right.
We got overcast. We got overcast skies up in Seattle. You guys are spoiled down south with that nice weather.
Yeah, I know. We're it's not too bad right now in San Diego, so can't really complain too much there, Jeff.
That's a great spot down there.
It's kind of like our
The problem up north there is when you go in the summer and it's all like the sun's out, you get faked out by it. And then people come and move there and then they realize afterwards, but it's all good.
Forever gloom, right?
Yeah.
Well, I guess the one bummer is we have time change, I think, coming up here soon-ish. I don't know exactly when, but it's never fun either. So I don't like that.
Yeah, thanks, but no thanks. Didn't it get pushed out though a little bit because when they reforecast or did all that stuff a couple years ago?
I don't know. I just follow my iPhone when it says it's time change, then I run with it.
Yeah, they really need to strap that like they like Arizona does, right? Just no more daylight savings.
Yeah, I thought that was
November 7th. I had to do a quick Google search. We had a little time left.
Yeah, that's funny. All right, well, thanks for joining. We do have a guest today. Our friend Jeff is joining us from Laceworks here. So, Jeff, welcome to the show. It's good to have you on, and we always like having guests and getting new insight for our viewers and kind of content and whatnot. So, I think we have some pretty good conversations we can have today. We have a couple of things. It's almost like a Microsoft and Apple day, if you want to look at it that way, right? We have a few things from Microsoft and Azure. We have a couple of things on the Apple side of things, and then a few DDoS attacks. So I don't know, guys, is there a certain story you want to start with, or anything kind of top of mind we want to jump into?
Well, sure. I mean, I think the Apple thing, I personally got all my stuff updated last night, so I jumped on that. But there's always a risk when you do that immediately, like what else could break type of thing. So I definitely recommend don't do all your devices at one time. When it comes to patching, start with one, evaluate that everything works on the backside, and then continue forward.
So you're saying don't take your Mac, your iPhone, your iPad, and your watch and just go, and then come back.
Don't do all three at the same time unless you can go without them. Yeah, I took my son's. Yeah, I took my son's phone, tested it. Okay, it's good.
I like that. Use your son as a development.
Exactly. We'll teach him young.
Yeah. That's a good point, right? It's always the trade-off of like, when do you do it versus waiting too long? And there's certain things where it's like, hey, if it's any kind of thing like security related and serious, like I kind of take the risk sometimes and say, let's just patch quickly and knock on a metal here on my Mac. They do a pretty good job of things like that and testing it. So I was telling a lot of people I know too, like, hey, I know you have iPhones and Apple devices, like do a patch because it's a pretty serious flaw in what they came across, right? It's almost almost like no user interaction, and our friends over at NSO Group again are out there doing their thing, so it makes it very scary and whatnot. So
I guess what concerned me is it was a dot release, not just a point, like a point of a dot release, if you will. So a dot 14.8,
something like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm waiting for the movie on this one. That's almost like a Hollywood script, weaponized in Israel, used by foreign governments, spying on activists.
Yeah,
that was a big one.
That's true, right? I mean, it's like we've kind of seen this stuff play out, I think, a few times, and it's sad that it keeps recurring. But I think we all know in this industry, it's not going to go away. And activists and journalists now are kind of being targeted in those types of countries, for speech and things like that. So it's pretty scary actually to kind of see more of this come to light and be weaponized, like as you said.
Well, it's quite novel malware as well. Never before seen with a unique exploit chain. So that is also telling of the group behind it and their level of expertise. So and then Apple products have historically, I wouldn't say been easier to compromise, but they haven't necessarily had as many vulnerabilities as say Microsoft. But to that end, seeing them target kind of personal devices like that just are indicative of the political climate of the groups and the nation states behind this. So
Apple even had that Blastdoor sandbox in place.
Mm-hmm.
for stuff like this. So hats off to the University of Toronto and Citizen Labs, the folks that, as you mentioned, shed light on this exploit.
Yeah,
definitely.
I think, Sammy, you brought up a good point too. Is I think that in the past, this is kind of probably changing as people say, oh, Apple is, I don't want to say unhackable, but it was like this perception that you couldn't get a virus, kind of quote unquote, on Apple. And I think as the world becomes more connected and we're living on our mobile devices more and more, we understand that like attack chain has gotten so much more complicated, and apps are so relevant now with the app stores and things like that like these things can happen. And as more and more people use these devices, they become bigger targets, right? So you're kind of seeing a shift a little bit there, in my opinion, too. And you're going to kind of continue to see, whether it's Apple, Microsoft, Google, whoever, just across the board, more attacks on like mobile end user devices, things like that.
Definitely. Something else to consider too is, and I'm not picking on them, I know there's Android and Apple people in the world, but Apple has this ecosystem where they can push the patches, where in the Samsung world or the Android world, it's got to go to the carrier to get approved and then released. So the fact that Apple can respond quickly, unless you have a Pixel, good point, because they can control it from that aspect. So it's always interesting to think about all the different use cases there and considerations, especially for business, right? If you're going to buy a business device, what one are you going to invest in, and which one's going to provide the better security for you overall?
Chromebooks. Is that thing for Chromebooks, right?
Nice.
Minimal OS, right? Yeah, there's always that kind of trade off and pros and cons, like you said, right? So it's good stuff.
Exactly.
Apparently this affected, I don't know, you hear rumors how many, but like 1.5 billion devices, and Amnesty International has released a detection toolkit. So I don't know if there's show notes we could update with a link so you guys can, everyone out there can detect whether they have been hit by this.
Yeah,
Definitely.
That's right. And you bring up a good point there, because the vulnerabilities were found across iOS, iPad OS, Watch OS, Mac OS. So this wasn't strictly one device type. It was pretty much their entire suite. Because it's affecting WebKit specifically. So, and that's why you're kind of seeing it across all the different OSs. But to that point as well, this is not the first this year. I think this is like number 15 that Apple has patched. So
15. In WebKit. I was just reading the notes on that, Sammy. Actually, that's a good point. It's 15 0 days in 2021 alone. So, people kind of know what they're using, and they're targeting, like you said, like where the users are actively using their their devices and what type of devices. So we're gonna kind of continue to see this trend, I think. So good stuff. Let's see. We also have, if we kind of take Apple now and we go to the other side, their friends over at Microsoft. We have a couple different things going on. I know we have some 0 days from the Windows side, and I think the interesting one we can maybe dive into is the cross-container. What are we kind of calling it? It had a name to it. I forgot. Azure Escape. That's what it's called. Azure Escape here in the news on, the joys of cloud computing and containerization and whatnot. So I don't know, Jeff, maybe kind of give us your thoughts on this one. I know this was probably pretty close to you and kind of what you do guys, over at Laceworks and whatnot. So what are some of your thoughts on this one?
Yeah, this was a shocking reminder that a container truly isn't or does not offer a security boundary. Specifically, in this case, it was Azure ACI service, so a multi-tenant environment. It looks like if in reading the Unit42, so hats off to those guys at Palo Alto that detected this. It looked like, unfortunately, ACI was using an older version of runc that allowed a container escape by simply overwriting the runc binary. You could escape to the host, basically have full control of a host in a multi-tenant environment. So again, just a reminder, shocking reminder, containers do not offer a security boundary offered by VMs. And unfortunately, this one could have been solved by just upgrading the container runtime.
Yeah, it's a good point. I mean, I think, there's a little bit of blind trust here when you kind of go to the cloud and you say, oh, I'm going to, whether it's, it doesn't matter, Google, Amazon, Azure. It's like saying, well, hey, like they're responsible for taking care of this underlying security because you as a consumer, like you have no access to this, right? So it kind of raises this question like, well, should you have access to do some testing of your own? And, like when do you kind of call the boundaries? And you have to kind of really understand that from like a business risk too, is saying, hey, are you going to really blindly trust this service, or infrastructure as a service or code as a service. So it's just a constant reminder that you really need like defense in depth, and you can't just assume like, well, hey, I'm paying for it, they're going to take care of it. Like, well, no. I mean, obviously, like, as you said, Jeff, they're kind of using an older version of some of the runtime code there, and it could have been, I think it was like 2-year-old code or something like that. So, like, in my opinion, if they're doing kind of regular testing, that could have been like, hey, this is kind of out there now and it has some pretty high vulnerabilities. Let's go ahead and patch these things. But I know it's also a patching versus operation and uptime type of thing. I mean, Brian, you kind of live that, more at the end user side, but this is just a reminder that you can't put all your eggs in one basket, and you got to have that true defense in depth, right?
Yeah, I mean, if they patch this stuff, could the code break that you loaded in there? So there's a lot of considerations and regression testing and things like that that have to occur overall in the notice and the things from that perspective for sure.
Yeah, the guys at Security Weekly, I was watching their podcast. They had a good take on it too, where something like this, where it's going to demand that we have more accountability, observability into the practices of our cloud security provider and the services and the things that they're doing on their end. So it's just like we need to get more info on the patching practices, the update practices of each cloud service provider service that we are leveraging.
Yeah.
So,
go ahead, Brian.
Go ahead, Sammy.
Well, yeah, and I was just going to mention not just the CSPs, but the organizations themselves need to understand like what they're responsible for in terms of the technologies that they're contracting from these providers. Because it's like so many people think that because they're using, let's just say, an AWS service, that it's inherently secure. But you have to tune that service so that it is secure. You have to implement the access controls and granular policies so that it is that way. So I feel like that's another thing. It's you have the CSP side, and you have to be able to trust them, but you also have to be able to fine tune the technologies that they provide to you. And so I feel like that's often missed with leveraging cloud infrastructures like Azure and whatnot. So.
Oh yeah. So you ready for my zinger?
Let's hear it, Brian.
All right. Just because they're compliant doesn't mean they're secure.
There you go. I like that.
They have tons of compliance behind them and check boxes and everything else, but it didn't mean that they were secure in this instance. So just something else to keep in mind too. Just because you check the box doesn't mean you should let your guard down overall. I mean, at the end of the day, it's a shared responsibility. The data's yours. Make sure that you're encrypting your data, that you're backing up your data in the cloud. You can't just assume all that stuff is done.
Yeah, I saw this on Reddit the other day. It might rustle some feathers, but it was compliance is necessary but overrated, and I think this is a good example of where that fits. It's like you could be completely compliant, but doesn't necessarily mean you're inherently secure. You're just achieving a baseline when you're achieving compliance. So.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think if you kind of look at that topic, I mean, compliance would be like its own show, right? I mean, a lot of people we know kind of come and say, hey, I want to get compliant, but it's kind of like, well, like, do you really want to get compliant? Or you're trying to like patch or audit? Like, there's two different things here, right? So I think to your point is some people kind of go like the other route and they want to shortcut a few things. And like, I think to your point, like you can be, let's say, non-compliant, but like way more secure than most compliant checkbox companies, in my opinion, right? So there's definitely a gap there in the industry, and I think there's too much. I don't want to say too much resources on the compliance side, but I think, Sammy, to your point, it's like, hey, how do we get a little bit more into the weeds on actually fixing the problems and not just checking the boxes? So it's good stuff.
Yeah, and this was a tough one, just due to the nature of being multi-tenant. So if anyone is not familiar with ACI, it's similar to Amazon's Fargate. So running multiple containers from multiple customers on shared infrastructure. So they would definitely put the Microsoft folks in a tough spot on this one. And as Brian mentioned, like upgrading a service with that much utilization is difficult as well. So it was a tough spot for the Azure folks.
Yeah, I think we're going to see more of these types of things too, whether, again, like pick your provider, right? I don't think there's anything, inherently good or bad versus one versus the other. This is just like the nature of kind of cloud and where we're going, and getting better at the openness of, hey, here's how I'm doing my testing at least, or when we're patching, and because you kind of have to have this patch life cycle still, even though you might have 1,000 customers on a container or in this environment, but still it's like at the end of the day, you can't neglect things because the onus could then come back to the provider and say, well, look, like this is like massive neglect on you. And that opens up a whole can of worms for lawsuits and all kinds of other legal things we haven't really seen yet. But it wouldn't surprise me if that stuff happens here soon.
Yeah. Yep. And under the hood, ACI leverages Kubernetes. So even if we look at that technology, it's relatively still in its infancy. So as an industry, we're learning about it. Container runtimes are changing. Docker was the default. Folks are moving to containerd, run C now. So it's the velocity of innovation, and it's tough to stay on top of.
That's a really good point. Like we're like all these cloud companies are, innovating really fast, which is great. But as you noted, the underlying technology, it changes so fast now. I mean, it's almost like every week there's something new coming out, like you haven't even heard of before. So it's hard for them to kind of almost go back and like, I almost say like scrap the product, but almost have to like re-architect and engineer almost these things when there's like major changes to the platforms and things like that. So really, really good point.
Yeah, and especially when you consider the complexity of something like Kubernetes, like that is not a simple DevOps software, and it has an extremely big attack surface if not configured properly by really skilled engineers. So, you bring up a really good point there.
Yeah, one of the articles I was reading was talking about the defense in depth. And so everybody always focuses in the front to the back, but what about the east-west traffic? And that's one of the other considerations through all this. And, working with various customers over the years, one of the things people don't consider is the networking costs in the cloud. It's not free. That's actually one of the biggest profit centers for all the cloud providers is the network traffic, because they already have the bandwidth there, but they run the clock up, and that's what causes them to make money and be profitable from that aspect. But you as the consumer to build out that zero trust type of model and having that protection on the east-west, it ends up costing you more. So I think that's another reason you see a lot of people not deploy it in maybe the most appropriate fashion with the defense in depth is because of the extra cost. They just assume, it's up in the cloud, it's safe and secure, but they still need to apply those different layers of extra protection and security, if you will.
Yeah, I think we spend a lot of time, Brian, like when we talk to our customers about cloud, and I'm sure Jeff, you're in the same boat. It's like there's a lot of just like time spent on education on who kind of owns what, defense in depth. You can't just say here's like a magic bullet or software and run it. It's like, no, you got to have multiple layers and steps here, and it's really kind of educating the customers on how do you kind of take this legacy approach of everything was under behind a firewall, right? We'll kind of use that term, the whole castle mentality, and now it's like, well, it doesn't exist anymore. It's everywhere. So it's like, how do we kind of continue to educate customers, and to your point, build those things out? So it's definitely a long, tedious process, but those that take it serious are like so much farther ahead than others. So.
And that was a great point on the east-west traffic. So we talked about Kubernetes still being a relatively young technology. When we look at the network control plane and service mesh, still ever changing. Folks are in early stages of adoption, Istio, Linkerd, all that stuff. So organizations are still getting their head around network control plane, east-west traffic. A lot of clusters today are still wide open.
Yeah. Let's see. Our friend Brian Krebs was a little bit here in the news. He got hit by another botnet. It sounds like the friends over at Maris here was like last week, I think. Looks like they kind of did a recent DDoS attack against him. So I don't think it was as big as the one that Cloudflare just recently took down, but still pretty good amount of, looks like it was 17 million or something like that. Bogus records per second. So, DDoS is still relevant and still out here. I think actually kind of talking a little bit about this last week or a couple weeks ago, we mentioned like kind of our DDoS, like ransom DOS as a service. So, it doesn't surprise me that some of these larger kind of journalists and contributor sites are sometimes targets of these things. So it's, DDoS is something that's not going to go away. It's hard to kind of prevent and kind of go after, but yeah, it can be pretty devastating on some of these things.
I saw an interesting.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Jeff.
I was just saying on this one, I saw an interesting stat out of Russia. I guess Yandex. I might be misinterpreting it, but I think they're like the Google of Russia, most popular search engine of Russia.
That's right. Yeah.
They were getting hit by 22 million requests per second on this one.
Yeah, it's crazy.
They were seeing anywhere from 200 to 350,000 unique hosts hitting them with these requests as well. So they're saying this was one of the biggest ones in history.
Yeah, looks like it was like almost 250,000 infected devices globally. So just shows you some of the scale that some of these botnet operators really have.
I was about to say, I would love to see this attack infrastructure and like just exactly what their admin console looks like and how many hosts are on this thing. That'd be intense. But yeah, I mean, honestly, this speaks a little bit to how important, I guess, criminals take Mr. Krebs and his content. I mean, enough to severely DDoS him with the same. It seems like a similar level of attack, maybe not quite as much as Cloudflare, but Cloudflare is an organization, and Krebs on security is, I mean, they're an organization too, but a lot smaller one. So it's just, that's telling.
Yeah, I think it was a kind of 5-year anniversary, if I'm not mistaken. I was reading through the report, but yeah, I mean, stuff like this, I mean, it's kind of those that have, I would say, vocal, opinions and things like that, and, or whether journalists or activists or whatever. I think, silencing that person is kind of the intent on some of the stuff here too, and preventing access. And I mean, like not to get political, but like I can see that stuff during election cycles. And I think there was some other country that had an election where they DDoSed one of the sites or something like that too. So like you can kind of see it from a hacktivism standpoint. I think DDoS is up there, because if I can prevent someone from going to my opponent's website to learn about my whatever ideas on so-and-so infrastructure, then great, things like that. So it's not going to go away. It's been around, and it's just scary stuff.
No, that's a great point. Yeah, the cancel culture. Unfortunately, we're probably going to see more of this stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh yeah, by far. And what blows my mind is what the zombies can be. So it's all these IoT devices. It's the routers that are out there that people don't update. So, I mean, we were talking earlier about patching your devices. I mean, the same thing goes for everything inside of your network. I mean, we know we've talked in the past, but TVs are connected. Then you have the Roku or the Apple TV or the Fire Stick behind that. And then you have your dishwasher that's now connected, and all the IP cameras in your home, and all these devices across the thing. And all of a sudden you look in your network and you got 80 IP addresses in just one house. Yeah. And so are you really protecting and patching and updating all those things? Because just because you're not on that cable modem every day doesn't mean it doesn't need a patch or an update.
Yeah, and are the vendors providing the patches that are readily when vulnerabilities become discovered? It's like, just because I have a few IoT devices that I don't have plugged in anymore, but that had vulnerabilities, but no patches released from the vendor. So I'm like, you're exposing, you're creating an attack surface in my own network that I can't even remediate because I don't have access to the underlying code. So it's like, that's another thing to consider when it comes to IoT devices, is they don't have the same level of service that your traditional desktop or end user devices are going to have.
Even my air fryer is connected now.
Nice.
Oh, that's actually kind of
cool. I'm jelly. I want one that's connected to the Wi-Fi.
Next thing you know, your Traeger grill is on fire in the back, and you don't know why.
I mean, it's true, Brian. I think you're right. I mean, like in my household, it's kind of funny. Like I'll log into the network and like, I got 40 devices, and it's like, dude, how do I have so many devices? And it's like, oh, the TVs, the this, the that, and it's like, man, it all adds up. And I think with the IoT, and we've kind of talked about this before, it's like for them, it's all about convenience and speed and cheapness, right? So security becomes like way, way bottom of the list if it ever gets patched, right? So for them, it's just about, how do I develop this or use this chipset that I can rebrand or white label and get my device to the market. And I mean, now like toys are connected. I mean, like everything is connected. And like, it's funny because like one of the things I like when I give a lot of presentations to kind of more like end users, I'll ask people like, hey, how many of you have a smart TV? Like everybody raises their hand. It's like, when was the last time you actually updated it? And they're like, what do you mean updated it? It's like, yeah, exactly. Like, these are things that can, be used in a botnet and you would never know it. Even just, a little bit of traffic times a million devices adds up pretty quickly, right? So that's what makes it tough. It's not like it's coming from like, a big college campus anymore, like these big companies. It's like, no, it's just spread out over millions and millions of small devices, right? So scary stuff. All right. I think kind of going back to Microsoft, there was a couple 0 days. I know, Sammy, I think you kind of saw some of these things too. The MS HTML 0 days that were recently talked about.
Yeah. So basically, with that one, an attacker could craft a malicious ActiveX control, and with that, they're able to execute, be able to perform remote code execution with that. So I know that I think they have released POCs and tutorials for it as well. So there are actually POCs that are guides already on hacking forums on how to actually exploit this actively in the wild. So it is getting relatively
real world code then. Yeah.
That's exactly right. Yep, and it's I think it was detected by Mandiant being actively used in the wild. So no, this is another bad one to add to the list. I think it was like 8.8 criticality for this one.
I think as we speak, there's still no fix.
There's no fix. Yeah.
As of a couple days ago, I think you're right. So there's still no fix, but there's a few workarounds and whatnot, and it just kind of, I guess, cracks me up that ActiveX is still like so relevantly used in all these types of exploits. And it's like, I don't know, like I saw this one thing one time where somebody recoded ActiveX to say, like, instead of saying like, do you want to run yes or no, it's like, do you want to infect your PC, yes or no? And you're like, well, wait a minute, what does that mean? You're like, maybe I shouldn't click this button that just says yes. I'm like, that's actually pretty clever.
Yeah, that's a good point. Like there is a little bit of social engineering required here, since it does require the user to actually open the document. That's probably why the criticality was reduced. But to that point, once they click on it, it's pretty much remote code execution. So I think that's why the criticality was still where it was. But yeah, this could be really helpful for social engineering engagements, particularly with the velocity that we're seeing them in 2021.
Yeah, it looks like Windows Defender. Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, just real quick, it looks like you can also, it was able to be launched through like preview, which also makes it kind of scary too. So not just clicking it, but even like previewing the document. So yeah, crazy stuff.
Yeah, so it looks like Defender has some signatures for it. So that means other antivirus and next-gen solutions can at least detect it. So that's probably another reason that it can drop down a little bit from that perspective, is there's preventative measures.
Yeah, and you can disable ActiveX in Internet Explorer. So like we said, workarounds, but no patch yet. So we'll keep the finger on the pulse there.
Then the question always becomes, once there is a patch, how often or when people are actually going to do the patching? It's always this, like you said, chicken and the egg problem. So
right,
corporate.
Well, then it's funny. Like recently, I just applied like the most recent Defender, the Defender patch, and it seems like it's tuned overly aggressive, and like it's flagging things that I wouldn't normally have. So it's I also don't want to get into the alert fatigue kind of area where people start to become numb from seeing so many alerts.
That's true.
And that's definitely an issue I see with end users. If they get too many of a specific alert, they'll just start to ignore them over time, especially when it's like the boy who cries wolf situation. So that might be my personal note. I don't know.
No, well, maybe with all the stuff you're doing and all the testing, it's like, hey, what are you really doing over here?
Right. I'm just tired of telling it, of it getting mad that I'm using
ignore.
Yeah.
Whitelist. Yeah.
But yeah, alert fatigue is responsible for my hair loss. So.
Oh, interesting. That's good. That's good to know, sir.
Right. And you're. Go ahead.
I'm glad the podcast is today, though. I was having a good hair day.
Yeah. Well, I was gonna say, like, and you're the professional. Imagine the end user. They're not gonna even have the patience for that. So.
Oh yeah. With the skill set shortage, it's a nightmare.
Yeah,
it's true.
That's actually that's a good segue, by the way, Derek, to the zero trust thing, since the federal requirements and particularly the skill set shortage, right, that they're going to be facing to implement that kind of strategy.
Yeah, I think for me, I kind of just see, kind of talk in general about zero trust. It's like, again, it's one of these things that people think is like, well, how do I buy it? It's like, well, it's not like a thing you just go buy. It's like it's a strategy. It's an architecture. It takes, months to years to kind of really get this thing right, depending where your network's at in the life cycle. So, Does it make sense? Yeah, it's great kind of concept and things to get to, but it's a very much a journey. And then as you guys are alluding to, there's just as we all know, a massive shortage in skill set across the board. So getting resources that can really implement this, understand it, and like not just that, but then go into a network and say, look, we got to kind of like go backwards before we can go forward is a big part too. So kind of breaking things down and rebuilding things is also very tough. So it's a great kind of concept, but especially in like the government side, it's going to take long time for us to get any kind of standardization around that, in my opinion.
Yeah, I saw a quote from Teresa Payton. I guess she's a former CIO of the White House. These mandates are great, but a lot of them, they haven't been funded, so there's no funds allocated for these. So it's going to be an interesting within the federal government how to get this done with no funds allocated.
Yeah,
chicken and egg.
Give it some teeth somehow, right? And then technical debt, which is something I kept seeing in one of the articles this morning, where it's basically like the retirement of the old, more simplistic technologies for the newer, more complex ones, and the amount of I guess time that's going to be required to retire those and then roll over to a new system, right? And then the migrations of all that data. So not only a skill set shortage and a budget shortage, but it seems like also maybe even a time shortage.
Yeah, there's no like
I always talk about
switch.
Security versus functionality, and so that's one of the issues we're going to run into is, can you be functional on day one? So say you go and roll out 802.1x as an example, and then everybody shows up and they can't get on the network. Well, that defeats kind of the purpose. So chicken and egg syndrome here for sure. And then having the right skill sets to be able to deploy these. I mean, let's be honest, a lot of those solutions aren't expensive from a licensing perspective to purchase. It's the implementation that is the hardest part, and that's why a lot of people don't do it, to be honest.
Yeah, it changes like like business workflow, how businesses work and operate. So you have a lot of pushback from the business to say, well, that's great, I want to be more secure, but if it slows my business down, then like, why should I do it? So there's again like that battle of convenience versus security. And I think the good news, at least for us on the security practitioner side, is security is kind of, cybersecurity in general is kind of getting like higher seats within like the boards of directors and a seat at the table, so to speak. So it's getting a little bit more relevance and strength, but it's not always the let's just be super secure and like, great, let's just unplug from the internet and have no computers and there you go, you're safe as can be, but you have no business. So it's a constant battle and challenge, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, and CISA, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, published a 46-page document with guidance for a lot of these agencies as well. So some good reading if anybody's interested, and they're looking for comments by October 1st on that migration guide to the cloud.
That's good. Yeah, we can post some links to those after the show and whatnot. And I think the other thing too that we kind of, I personally think we're going to see more is, kind of private sector and government getting tighter and tighter and working better, because private sector can work, say faster is maybe a good word, right? And government kind of has some of the other side of it. So you're going to kind of, I think, see a convergence in those two kind of working together to really, I don't want to say solve cybersecurity, but improve upon it, right?
Yeah, and just a shout out to the DoD and their efforts, what they're doing on Platform One. It's incredible the innovation we're starting to see out of the U.S. government as well now. So hats off to Nick and his team over at the DoD Platform One. Yeah,
I think we all know that cybersecurity is a national kind of thing we have to protect here and whatnot. So it's going to continue to get a lot of relevance and steam. And again, like political parties aside, it is very important that we take it serious and go from there. So it hopefully continues to kind of get that attention in a good way to improve upon the entire United States, right? And actually just across the globe, honestly, right? I mean, not just this country, but everyone really. So
yeah, actually, you mentioned Platform One and going into infrastructure as code. I know, Jeff, you were particularly interested in the acquisition from Nessus of Acurus. Do you want to give maybe some thoughts on that, or what you kind of expect to see from that?
Yeah, one of the founders is a buddy of mine, so shout out to Payush Sharma and Om are the founders of Accurix. So super great guys, smart guys. What they're working on at Accurix is a great platform around infrastructure as code. So what they can do is they can detect the drift between an infrastructure as code repo and provision cloud resources, then offer a pull request on any changes or drift to the repo and running cloud resources. So great bunch of guys, great team, well deserved. So shout out to the Accurix team.
Nice.
And one of the major use cases we see day in and day out in the field today is security around infrastructure as code scanning.
That makes sense, right? I mean, like as we move to more of that like DevOps mentality and deploying as code, like it becomes super important to, I mean, like if I could kind of go in there and change the underlying infrastructure, you could wreak a lot of havoc, right? So it makes a lot of sense as to these new types of security companies coming out and new technologies and these other companies looking at that more serious, right? Which is great.
Yeah,
you could break in and put your botnet in that code, and then it just gets replicated every time you deploy it. I mean, that's the whole purpose of infrastructure as code, to automate the rollout of all that. So yeah, that's critical. So that's a great solution, and good to see it be acquired and hopefully get some more teeth in it.
Yeah, lots of acquisitions in place. We saw Apollo pick up Bridge Crew. Aqua, where I came from before Lacework, I was at Aqua Security. They picked up the TFSec project. So you're going to see more acquisitions in this space coming.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's a lot of consolidation happening in cybersecurity right now. So it makes for kind of fast innovation cycles. And then those that kind of do, I've seen a lot of people break out and start other new companies. So, which is great for everybody, I think, right? I mean, like to me, innovation is key. It needs to kind of maintain a fast pace, and it's exciting that we get new kind of toys and tools to go play with and break.
And stay tuned for announcements from Lacework in this area as well.
Nice. Yeah, we can do a follow up on that one for sure, Jeff.
Sounds good.
Awesome. Well, I think we're pretty much right about time, gentlemen. I appreciate everybody's time on this one. We're kind of getting back into it here, and Jeff, thanks for joining us, sir. And hopefully you had some fun. And we'll have to do this again soon. And again, just a reminder, kind of subscribe wherever we're putting the buttons, depending which box you're in looking at. But we'll have some follow-ups here, and like and share and subscribe. And thanks everybody. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Jeff.
Always
Take
great
care.
to hang out with the Triden Group. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.